Hey everybody, before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of ways that you can engage with me on a more personal level. I have a few avenues set up and I keep focusing on one, and I figured why don't I make a short little video talking about all of them real quick before we get into these episodes. So first thing, Patreon. There's a link in the episode description and every episode description to the Patreon, as well as a video on the feed called Major Announcement that has all the details of what each tier offers and how much they cost. I implore you to check that out. I offer a lot of cool shit for my patrons. Second thing, the Discord channel. There's also a Discord link in the episode description and in every episode description. I have multiple channels set up there for each show that I'm covering, and it's a great way to just engage with me. I have a channel set up for MMA talk as well. I'm a big MMA fan, so if you're an MMA fan, you can check that out as well. There's a link to the Discord in the episode description. And then lastly, the Facebook and Twitter. Social media. Follow me on there. I post news on there. When I say news, I mean like, hey, I'm stopping covering this show. Hey, I'm starting covering this show. Let me know what you think about this. I do live watches of things on Facebook where like I'll check in and say I'm watching so-and-so show, and then I'll like live comment while I'm watching it, and that'll be cool if maybe you watch that show too and you want to watch along with me, or you're watching it later and you will see my thoughts, which are usually pretty entertaining because I'm usually pretty high when I'm writing them. So check out all those links in each episode description, and let's talk about this episode. Peace.
One mic, one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. One mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 1, Episode 3 of HBO's The Last of Us, entitled Long, Long Time. This episode title is based upon the Linda Ronstadt song that we hear both Bill and Frank, I guess, quote-unquote, perform during the end of the first of several scenes that we see of them together in this magnificent episode. In this scene where we are introduced to this song, or introduced to the playing of this song, Murray Bartlett, who plays Frank. Side note, was he not virtually unrecognizable in that role? Like, if you know Murray Bartlett as Armand on The White Lotus, did it not take you a minute to even realize, like, holy shit, that's Murray Bartlett? It took me a minute. But in this opening scene with the two of them, as this scene is ending, we see Murray Bartlett's character Frank is about to leave. And as he's about to leave, he sees this piano and he starts playing this song, and he does a terrible job. And in a consistent kind of like, I think, subverting of expectations of what we can expect these two characters to be, we see Nick Offerman's Bill sit down, and while the singing isn't great, it's a very heartfelt and emotional rendition of the song. And I thought that was interesting to kind of end that scene that way, where you would kind of think, I think leading into that, you might kind of think like, okay, he's probably going to do a pretty decent job of performing this song, and then his performance is bad, and then Nick Offerman's is like, again, aside from the quality of the singing, the overall performance was pretty good. But I think I'm going to segue into talking about the episode from here, because that scene is pivotal, because if it isn't for that, if he doesn't see that piano, if he doesn't play the Linda Ronstadt song, and then if Nick Offerman's character, if Nick's Bill doesn't then play the song, like, none of this really happens. And I think we learn a lot about this other side of surviving this, I don't know, what do we even call this? It's not really technically a pandemic, but we'll call it pandemic, but semantics, we don't need to hear it. We know it's not technically a pandemic, I don't think, but we'll call it a pandemic anyway. But one of the other effects of a pandemic is these two and their emotional connection, their relationship, and how that survived and thrived despite, or maybe even because of, these circumstances. And I think it's really beautiful that this episode is named after the song that sparks this beautiful relationship, where if this had never happened, if he never sees the piano, the relationship never happens. And I think that's a really appropriate episode title for this wonderful episode. But before we get into the heart of the episode, we do have a couple of scenes with Joel and Ellie that precede the Bill and Frank storyline. We see Joel and Ellie making their way to get supplies from Bill and Frank after the whole Tess, I don't know, I guess we can call it a suicide from last week. And we also get a few examples that show us what Ellie's life must have been like prior to the pandemic. So throughout these opening sequences, we essentially get like kind of like backstory on the pandemic. We get Joel kind of explaining what he thinks started it. from what I've heard, the game never explicitly explains this, but it looks like the show is going to attempt to, or when I say explain, I mean like give a backstory for how it started. But Joe says that he thinks that the cordyceps somehow evolved into something that could live in flour or something like that, something that's very prevalent, that's consumed by everyone, and that, long story short, this shit got in the flour on like a Thursday, and by Monday everyone was fucked. That's pretty much what Joel lays out. And then we also, I think, see some examples of what Ellie's life was like I said, prior to the pandemic, but also for someone who was born post this turn of events, right? So her whole life has been in the QZ, right? So she's like outside and marveling at just like, oh, this is what it's like being in the woods. This is what cars are like. So like she doesn't know how to put on a seatbelt. Like, oh, there's a crash plane. Oh, you used to be in the, you've been in the air. Like all these things that we take for granted. We get to see Ellie, someone who was born after all of these things stopped being a thing, kind of marvel at the things that we currently take for granted. Those of us who are watching the show, the idea of cars and planes and all that good shit. And it never ceases to amaze me. And I think this episode, I should say, did a good job of this too with the Ellie stuff. It never ceases to amaze me how quickly we can go from, nothing happening at all to something like this happening, and then how quickly that can end up where we're now in a place where there's a shit ton of people who don't know what life was like before that. Like we saw this on Station 11 as well. Like there's a character who was born after their event who doesn't even know like what an iPod is or what an iPhone is, and they're seeing it and they're looking at it like, wow. And it's interesting to me, in real life, as we move forward and we integrate more and more technology and things are becoming more and more automated and everything is so technological, how quickly and how easily things can regress to like a completely primitive, at least by our current standards, a completely primitive way of life. And we saw it in Station 11 with people looking like, what the fuck is this? Like, and an iPhone is useless in that time too, as well as it would be on this show. Completely useless. But and now we see Ellie kind of marveling over these things that we take for granted. And I think that's kind of cool that, like, not cool, but like an interesting aspect of a story to have characters who are born after some sort of event like that, who are completely unfamiliar with all the technological advances that we've experienced up to this point in our lives, and they're just kind of like, yeah, what the fuck is that? And it's useless now in this post-pandemic life, and it's like, hey, it's 2040 and we don't have any kind of technology. I think that's kind of cool. But we end up starting the Bill Frank storyline in 2003 at the start of all of this whole pandemic, and Bill's like a survivalist / doomsday preparer. He's living in this underground bunker, and you could tell he's been like waiting for this day. And I'm going to talk about the letter later, but there's a letter that Ellie reads from Bill at the end of the episode where he even says something like, yeah, like I was happy when the pandemic happened because fuck people, right? And I'm like I'm kind of on board with that way of thinking. Like, I'd be sad about the people who I care about not being gone, but I watched Bill after he emerges from the start of this pandemic with envy, like him emerging into this town and like no one's there. He can just do whatever he wants. Like that was like a little mini pipe dream for me. Like, oh man, how cool is this? But we're treated to a montage of him doing everything that a smart person would do in an apocalypse, a post-apocalyptic world. Which, I mean, you kind of see it on The Walking Dead, but The Walking Dead did not really, that wasn't their wheelhouse, was living in like a place of reality. Like, what would this stuff really be like? They threw that out pretty early. But this, I liked what Bill was doing. He's like raiding the Home Depot. He's like the gas plant. Like, and for a sec, when this happened, I was like, how would he even know what, like you see him like turning like this thing that looks like a steering wheel. I'm like, how would he even know what to do? But then obviously the level of preparation that this guy has done, he probably knows every possible thing he would need to know to survive. So I now buy it, but at the time I was like, how would he even know what to do? But he's at this gas plant. He's got a generator. He sets up a nice like alarm / security system with like booby traps out front and shit, like outside, nice gate. And he essentially makes a gated community for this town. And I like the idea of someone who is prepared for something like this, and then they come out after all, and he, like, everything he did was super smart. And there's things that I noticed even while I was preparing the notes that I didn't notice while I was watching, that I was like, oh shit, I didn't even think of that when I was watching it. And there's a lot of examples that show you just how prepared Bill is. Like even something small, like the fact that he waited before he even came out of his bunker. Like he knew, let me wait a long enough time to where people will consider this like a dead zone. And then I can come out and I can live my life normally instead of coming out and like having to look over my shoulder all the time. So I even thought that was smart. So 4 years pass, and now one of his booby traps has captured who we learn to be Frank. Frank is trapped in this hole. He swears he's not infected. He's trying to make his way to Boston, which is where Ellie and Joel are at present day, but not at this time. This would be, I think, 4 years after, so 2007. This would be 2007. He's headed to Boston from the Baltimore QZ. He convinces Bill that he's not a danger, asks for some food, says he hasn't eaten in 2 days, all this good stuff. Bill lets him out, lets him shower. I don't know how long he showered, but I feel like he was in the shower for like an hour, which, of course, completely fucking justifiable, right? And so he comes down and he eats, and Bill presents him with like this thing that looks like it's from like a Michelin restaurant. It's rabbit. He pairs it with wine. He's even pouring the wine in a very sophisticated way. And being the complete fucking fat ass savage that I am, Frank says something like, "Oh, this is a wonderful lunch." And I go, "Lunch? That's lunch? Then what's for dinner?" And my wife said the same thing. Like, "Oh, that's lunch? What's for dinner?" Like, why is that what we're concerned with? But magnificent looking lunch this guy has. And then I know that it's around this point that I started to suspect that this was going to turn into a gay relationship. Because at the time, of course, we don't know anybody's sexuality. Who the fuck cares? Like, it's post-apocalyptic world, fucking infected zombies, whatever you want to call them. Who gives a fuck where you putting your dick? Like, it's not important. But I wasn't thinking about any of that at all. But it wasn't until, I don't know, I felt like the pouring of the wine felt a little bit like, I don't know, it felt more like they were on a date than it did just two guys having lunch. And the fact that he even prepared something like this, it just kind of felt like, I was like, oh, he might be gay, but I'm gonna wait and pause on that. I'm not sure yet. But then we fast forward 3 years later, and well, we don't do it then, but before we do before we move forward another 3 years, this is when they establish what I talked about at the top, the playing of the song. This eventually leads to Bill, I think, essentially confirming that he's gay, but he hasn't had sex with a man before. Frank's just like, go upstairs and take a shower. I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, he really about to clap them cheeks. Like, go upstairs and take a shower. It's going down. Like, we're gonna make this happen right now. But yeah, so that's what ends up happening. They end up forming this relationship, and then we jump forward another 3 years. So I guess we're now at 2010, and this is when I realized that this was going to be the whole episode, essentially. That like, this wasn't like a couple of scenes with Bill and Frank, and then we're going to go back to Joel. At this point, I was like, this is probably going to be all the way up to the credits, which didn't end up happening, but close enough. But Bill and Frank are going to fight. And again, the natural relationship, right? But I like what they're fighting over, because Frank wants to kind of like gussy up the space. You know, I want to mow the lawn. I want to fix up the stores. I want to do all these things. And Bill doesn't see a point to it. And he's like, this is how you show that you love things, by giving care and attention to them. And like, this episode works with like a lot of little subtle things that work really well, especially when you think of it in retrospect, right? Like the plants. So like, Frank talks about showing care and attention to the things that you love. Toward the end of the episode, we see Bill voluntarily watering the plants. Like, okay, he's showing care to these plants. He's no longer like, who gives a fuck? He cares now. And that's really the whole point of the episode. It's like Frank comes along, and now Bill has something to give a fuck about. But the episode ends, well, when the episode is ending, we see Joel and Ellie walking up, and we see that plant dead. And like that, like, I don't know, I thought that worked to great effect, the dead plant. And that was an example of them kind of like building up these little things, these things that don't seem like really impactful when you see them, but then when you see Joel and Ellie walk up to the dead plant, it's kind of like, oh, okay. I like when shows, again, attention to detail, the small things. The same thing that I was kind of just shitting on Mayor of Kingstown about in my latest video for that show. But like I said, Bill doesn't really see a point to doing all this. And Frank seems to also kind of be, I think, at least from Bill's perspective, and even from our perspective, in denial about the state of the world. He talks about, one day we're gonna have friends come over and we're gonna have company, we're gonna have nice dinners, and essentially he's like pining for a normal life, which is the opposite of what Bill wanted, right? He was cool just being alone, doing his old thing. He didn't like people. Frank comes along, changes his whole perspective. And now Frank's talking about, now we're gonna have friends, we're gonna have dinners and shit like that. And Bill's like, I've already accepted this as an impossibility. Like, that's not even on my plate, no pun intended, having dinner with friends. And I think it's possibly easier for him because in this situation, Bill is cool with accepting this regardless, right? So he has no need to yearn for company. Like, he's cool with just being alone. So the idea of like, oh, we're never gonna have friends, Bill doesn't give a shit. But that's important to Frank. And of course, we know that they will eventually meet Tess and Joel, and we see this in this episode. We see them having lunch. Bill with the gun on the table, cocked and loaded, pointed at Joel because he can't trust him. But I like how Joel essentially kind of proves himself trustworthy by showing that he has the same mindset as Bill. And we learned that this is essentially the start of the relationship that these four form. It's very much a kind of like a scratch my back, I scratch yours kind of relationship. Joel's like, we have these things in the QZ that could be useful to you. You have these things that we need. Hey, let's scratch each other's back. But as Joel's leaving, he warns Bill that, one day Raiders are going to come and they're going to fuck you up and it's going to be a problem. Bill's like, nah, I'm cool. So what did I say? We're at 2010. So now we jump 3 more years later. We're at now 2013. And just as Joel predicted, the Raiders have come. And this scene was interesting to me for a couple of reasons. One, I really liked the explosions and shit like that, how the scene started from inside with Frank, where we don't see what's happening outside. And then as Frank is getting up and he's starting to piece things together, we can then start to kind of piece things together too. And then he's looking for Bill. And like, I think us and Frank collectively are coming to the realization of what's happening in this scene. And I thought that was exciting. But then when Frank gets outside and Bill's just standing there in the middle of the street shooting people, and he gets shot, I'm like, of course you got shot. What the fuck are you doing? Like, he could have been on the second floor of his house picking off people outside of his window. Because the way this is shot, you can see their house is like their bedroom is facing this area. Like, he could have been in there doing that. But so I don't know why he did that, but I think it's an example of the show going, we need Bill's shot. We need Frank to be concerned for his life, and this is how we got to get there. But I don't know. He could have done this without harming himself. But that's what ends up happening. They have a scene where I don't know about you guys, I thought Bill died at the end of this scene. Like, he closes his eyes and it cuts to black, and I'm like, oh shit, Bill died. And then it comes back up, and then I like the fake out here. They got me good. I don't know if they got you guys good. They got me good. When they come back up, we see someone on a porch in a wheelchair, but it's too far away. We can't tell who it is. Somebody else comes back, and we hear Frank call Bill. And I'm like, oh shit, Bill's still alive? I'm like, well, he's in a wheelchair. And then they cut in, and we're like, holy shit, what? Frank's in the wheelchair, Bill is okay. And Frank is now clearly suffering from some sort of terminal illness. They don't specify what it is. I feel like at some point I kind of inferred that it was cancer, but like, they don't say whatever it is. But Frank decides that, oh, I'm sorry, I failed to mention it's now 10 years later, by the way. So now it's 2023, 10 years later, and like I said, Frank's now sick with this terminal illness, and Bill is seemingly okay from his gunshot wound. And Frank decides, like, I've had enough of living like this. It's time for me. This is going to be my last day, buddy. It's time for me to get up out of here. We're going to have a great last day, and then I'm checking out. I want you to crush all these pills up, put them in my wine. We're going to go lay down in the bed, and that's going to be a wrap. And again, I don't know about you guys, but it was probably about 5 to 10 seconds after he laid out this plan that I was like, Bill gonna do it too. And the way Bill comes out and serves the food and everything, I'm thinking like, okay, he's definitely doing this. And one thing that I thought was a really, really nice touch, another thing I should say, there's a lot of nice touches in here. Mainly the focus on telling this beautiful story about this relationship between these two people. And there's just this other side of the apocalypse, like this forming of this relationship and how it transformed each of these people and made them into somebody who they were different before, who they're different now than they were before they met each other. I'm really fucking up my words here. But aside from all that I absolutely loved, I love the fact that Bill brings out Frank's final meal is the same as their first meal together. Like, that was the rabbit and the wine and all that. I thought that was a very nice touch as well. And I feel like by that point, if you weren't already crying, you were probably about to cry. I didn't cry during this, but I'm not an easy crier. So that's not a knock against anything that the show did. I'm just not one that cries easily. But there's many moments where it's conceivable that one could have started crying. And I think if I were the crying type, that would have been it for me, because I'm a fat fuck who loves food. But like, the idea is like, oh my God, the same rabbit. That like, of course I would be moved by the fucking food, right? But hey, it brings about the same meal. I thought that was a nice touch. So they lay it out. They lay out what's actually happening, and before they actually verbalize that Bill plans on dying as well, I had already figured it out long prior to that, and I had also already figured. And once I made that conclusion, I also made the conclusion that Joel and Ellie are gonna arrive and find them dead, which. Technically, they didn't find them dead. They were able to arrive at the conclusion they were dead without having to actually see the bodies. And side note, I actually thought it was a nice touch that we didn't see the bodies. Like, the way they started to pull inside the camera inside their bedroom as the episode closed out, but they stopped short of showing the bodies. I thought that was a nice touch. I can't even really pinpoint why I liked that. But I don't know. I felt like it would have been a disservice to the beauty of their story. Actually, I said I feel like I don't know why I like that, and then I proceed to verbalize why I liked it. But I'm arriving at this conclusion just now as I'm stating it. But I think it takes away from the beauty of their relationship to show them looking the way they probably looked at that time. Whether that's and that's regardless of whether or not they were infected and had fungus or whatever, or just natural decaying of their bodies. Like, I feel like if you showed them in a loving way or something like that, it might have been implausible. Like, they shouldn't look that good after, well, we don't know how much time has passed, but after however much time has passed, they probably shouldn't look that good. But I don't know. I think it's nice to leave it left I can't say unsaid, but unviewed, the current state of their bodies, and we can just kind of like assume a nice picturesque, like, they're asleep in each other's arms kind of deal. So I thought that was a nice touch as well, to not actually show the bodies. But Joel and Ellie do arrive, and they read a note that Bill has left for them. Well, for Joel. And it does have a very heavy-handed message for Joel and the audience, I think, because Bill leaves everything to Joel. A truck, items to make a battery, which, side note, I don't know if this was... could be me reading too much into it, but am I to infer that Bill kept the parts to make a battery separate so that Joel would have to come and make the battery in order to use the truck? And I believe that's what we are supposed to be taking away from that. And I think that's fucking brilliant. That is fucking brilliant. I love that. But again, attention to detail. I fucking love it. I didn't shit on Mayor of Kingstown for it. I shit on a couple of things that Mayor of Kingstown did. But when it's what I said. Like shows that overlook the attention to detail will never be as good as the ones that don't. And when you have something like this, or something like I talked about Andor specifically for reasons in the Mayor of Kingstown video, but something like Andor where they pay attention, they care about those things, those are always going to be like the elite level shit. And you can never quite reach that point if you don't have that attention to detail. And I love the attention to detail here. Just the breaking down of the battery, all that good shit. But he tells in the letter, he talks to Joel about, men like us are meant to protect other people, and you have to protect Tess, and all of that is very heavy-handed of like, make sure you take care of Ellie. And, Joel has to leave to kind of like compose himself after he reads the part about protecting Tess. And I think that is because that was Joel's kind of like, I think, punch to the gut kind of like reminder that he's 0 for 2 protecting the women that he cares about. His biological daughter and Tess. So like, I think that for him was like a reminder of like, okay, I fucked up in this aspect of my post-apocalyptic life. I fucked up this part. This being Ellie, this is my chance to make right on that. So I think that's gonna be what's really gonna motivate Joel to give more attention, I should say, to Ellie. And he lays out his little rules for her before they leave, all that good stuff. The plan is to head to Wyoming and look for Tommy, so that should be good. Obviously, they're not gonna make it there without any issues, but I'm interested to see what happens. So I want to wrap up with a couple of thoughts real quick. And that'll be it until episode 4. But also, I do want to point out, I didn't do a video this week for my companion video series for the video game. a lot going on this week. I was like, I played some of it. I feel like I didn't play enough to do a video. I was gonna play it more on Sunday, and I was like, I kind of rather would get high and drunk and watch football. So that's what I ended up doing. But it worked out because, as far as from what I'm hearing, not everything, but mostly everything in this episode isn't in the game. So this is all new shit. So I don't even have to worry about like, oh, now I gotta play up through episode 3. Like, no, I can play up through episode 2 and be just fine, or I can play up through the end of episode 3 and it's gonna be the same shit. So there will be a second video for the companion play along video series. If you're watching this for the first time, you're unfamiliar with that, you can find it on the feed or check out maybe like the first video. I talked about it a little bit. But that'll come out sometime later this week, and it will be, we'll say through episode 3, but, if you watched it, you get it. So I want to close with a couple of thoughts. Is Ellie starting to concern you guys? And the reason I say that is, not only is she's starting to seem very, very, for the sake of a better word, fucking stupid. Going down in that like little basement area that she went down into in this episode, armed with nothing more than the knowledge of how stupid of a fucking idea that was really dumb. And she goes down there, and I like the fact that she moved the trash can to give herself kind of like, okay, this is how I can get out. But I also didn't like the fact that she went down there without knowing for sure how she would get out. Like, she might have looked down and be like, I can move that trash can, but I wouldn't have been so confident on that. Like, who knows what's going on with that trash can when you get down there. I don't know. That was really stupid. But I think that it is the sign of things to come, of Ellie recklessly putting herself in situations where Joe is going to have to come save her. And that kind of, like the damsel in distress thing, that irritates me. But I also don't think that's what Ellie's going to be. Because we also see her swipe a gun from Frank's desk. She's very, very focused on having a weapon of her own, which is not the behavior of someone who ends up being a damsel in distress. That's someone who very much wants to take control of their life. So maybe she won't. But she secretly puts it in her backpack, and I feel like that's gonna come back around later to much negative consequences. And then I'm also wondering, is she like borderline like psychopath? Like, sociopath. I don't know. I conflate the two sometimes, but. Like, the maniacal look on her face when Joel kills the soldier at the end of episode 1, how she's looking like, yeah, kill that motherfucker. Like, that kind of look that she had. And then you add her, like, cutting the zombie's forehead in this episode, the stabbing him in the head. And I guess I'm basically wondering if she's basically going to start becoming a big liability for Joel. And I think that's kind of a foregone conclusion. She is going to be a liability. But, I don't know, I'm just wondering if this isn't going to be the happy partnership that I expected. I kind of expected them two to get along. And any kind of, I don't want to say negativity, but anything that gets in their way would be external. Now it seems like there's going to be a lot of internal strife here as well. And then, I feel like there was one more thing I want to mention about her. I was going to say, like, the cutting of the zombie's head and the stabbing of it isn't necessarily indicative of her being, like, a sicko, but it could just be her natural curiosity. But, yeah, I just want to throw that out there, too. I don't want to say I'm accusing her of being a psycho, but I'm just wondering if anyone else is wondering. That's what I was trying to get at. And then lastly is a question I want to pose to the group out here. There was an 80s song that played at the end of episode 1 that no one heard. No one in the show heard. I don't even remember what song it was. I talked about it in my video for it. But I just wonder what was happening that prompted that. Because the Raiders that come were in 2013. So that would have been way before. I was like, oh, maybe the Raiders were coming, and he turned on the song. Plus, that was at night, and I feel like the radio was playing during the daytime. I was kind of hoping we would find out what was happening that caused Bill or Frank to play that song at whatever point they played it. But now I'm also kind of wondering, too, and this thought just popped in my head, I wonder if Bill or Frank played it not because there was trouble, but because they knew that playing it would get Joel to come there. And so if Bill is like, all right, we're planning this double suicide, I'm going to leave this note for Joel, and then I'm going to play an 80s song to get him to come here and find it. So again, those are things that I'm kind of inferring. It's not all on the screen there. At least I don't think it is, but Yeah, I was curious if there was a reason for playing the 80s song. I feel like that might be what it is, what I just said, but we'll see. Or we won't see, and I'll just have to stick with my own fabricated explanation. But that's my thoughts on this episode, a remarkable episode of television. I think it's crazy, and crazy not in a bad way, crazy in a good way, that in the third episode of the series, they pulled some shit like this. Like, that is a gutsy fucking move, especially for a zombie show. Like, you run the risk of alienating a lot of fans here. Like, a lot of people who were, all those big numbers they did on the first 2 episodes, all the numbers that are coming from fans of the game, where this kind of shit ain't in the game. Like, you run the risk of alienating a lot of fans here, but you're doing it in the service of making great art. So some like borderline talentless fucko like me can come here and praise you for it. So I appreciate it. But great episode of this show. I'm really looking forward to what they have in store for the remaining. I believe there's 9 episodes total. So for the remaining 6, what they have in store. And I will see you guys next week for episode 5 and later this week for a video game play along. So until then, peace.